Castro and the mob. Born in New Orleans in 1939, Oswald was raised by his widowed mother, Marguerite.
We must understand that Lee had two brothers, so he was not raised just with a woman alone. He was a happy-go-lucky youngster, actually. He studied animals, was often in the zoo, and as we know, he was picked up in the Bronx Zoo while in New York playing hooky from school. And I consider that normal also, playing hooky from school. Many, many boys do this.
He dropped out of school in the 10th grade and joined the Marines at 17. At one point, he qualified as a sharpshooter, an average rating for Marines. Oswald served in the Far East, where the super-secret U-2 spy plane was based.
He was an oddball.
Mac Osborne was Oswald's roommate for 9 months.
I really think it was a matter of he felt like he was a little smarter, possibly better than the rest of the people.
He was smart enough to learn a second language, Russian.
He would go into town on his own and come back with his Russian newspapers that he would then sit around with a Russian dictionary and try to translate out of this newspaper, and apparently taught himself to be semi-proficient anyway.
Oswald soon had a chance to use his Russian. He got an early military discharge, supposedly to take care of his ailing mother, but he quietly obtained a passport to travel to the Soviet Union.
How can Lee Harvey Oswald get out of the Marine Corps 3 months ahead of time on a dire need discharge and at the same time be issued a passport to travel? I think my son was sent to Russia. It's not that I feel that he was an agent of the CIA. It's because I have so much correspondence with the State Department, plus the letters that Lee wrote to me from Russia, that indicates that he was an agent of our government, definitely.
Did the CIA recruit Oswald while he was in the Marines? In 1975, Dan Rather asked then-Director William Colby.
No. We had no contact with Mr. Oswald.
No contact before he went to the Soviet Union?
No contact with him before he went to the Soviet Union, no contact with him after he returned from the Soviet Union, no contact with him while he was in the Soviet Union.
Or was Oswald working for the KGB? The Soviets gave him a visa in near-record time, and Oswald headed straight for the American embassy in Moscow to renounce his citizenship. Also in 1975, Dan Rather talked to Richard Snyder, who was the U.S. consul in Moscow when Oswald turned up at the embassy.
I can recall him being brought into the office by the receptionist, and his saying, something to the effect, I've come to give up my American passport to renounce my citizenship. He said, as I can recall, I am a Marxist, and I intend to become a citizen of the Soviet Union.
Was it your impression that he had been in touch with Soviet authorities before he came to see you?
Oh, yes. He made that clear. He said he, one way or another, probably in several ways, but he had applied for Soviet citizenship.
Here's a man who's been in the Marine Corps, worked at an important base in Japan. Didn't that raise a flag of concern in your mind or in someone's mind?
Yes, it did. He did say that he had information from his Marine Corps service, and that he intended to make available to the Soviet authorities everything that he knew, everything that he had learned.
Priscilla Macmillan of Harvard University's Russian Research Center was a reporter in Moscow in 1959. She met Oswald there and interviewed him at length. She later wrote a book about him and his wife, Marina.
He said that when he was 16, he had been handed some literature about the case of the alleged atomic spies, Julius and Ethel Rosenberg. He at that time was at high school in the Bronx in New York City, junior high. And he said that politicized him and made him hate the United States.
Soviet officials denied Oswald citizenship and ordered him to leave. A few hours later, Oswald slit his wrist. Then, without explanation, the Soviets agreed to let him stay, not in Moscow, but in faraway Minsk. He was given what Soviets considered a luxurious apartment, a good job at a factory, and a stipend.
He was sent to Minsk in January of 1960, and the spirit of Camp David was in flower. It was right after Khrushchev's visit to President Eisenhower, where he'd gone to Camp David, and they didn't want any scandals. So the question was he an espionage problem for them? Were they afraid that he was an espionage agent? Or was he a public relations problem? And I think they ended up handling him as a public relations problem.
In April '61, Oswald married a Russian girl, Marina Prusakova. At the same time, he was planning to leave the Soviet Union. Surprisingly, Marina had no trouble getting an exit visa.
That was the most, to me, suspicious part of the story. I don't now think it was suspicious. Not that he got to stay in the Soviet Union, although that was unusual. But what was much more unusual was that he returned to the United States with a Soviet wife. And sometimes they got permission for their wife to leave the country, and sometimes they didn't. And I think that was the beginning of a change in policy, and the Oswalds got their visas at the same time.
The State Department paid the Oswalds' way to the U.S. and pressured immigration to let Marina enter the country.
Did anyone with the CIA debrief Oswald when he returned to this country?
No, the CIA did not debrief him. I think there are some unclassified or declassified reports of FBI debriefings, but the CIA did not debrief him.
Say to you, as I have before, that that's difficult for many people, and in all candor, difficult for me to believe, that a young man in the Marines, gets out of the Marines, goes to the Soviet Union, marries a Russian woman, moves back to this country, comes back into the society, and it is difficult to believe that the CIA did not, under some circumstances, debrief him.
Right. Well, I think I understand your doubt on this question. I think you have to look at the circumstances. Mr. Oswald was what can be called a defector to the Soviet Union. We did have a report on Mr. Oswald, which the FBI gave to us about it. We also received some material from the embassy in Moscow about Mr. Oswald when he tried to disclaim his citizenship. We had a little file, therefore, on Mr. Oswald, which consisted of the 2 reports from the FBI, the 2 reports from the embassy in Moscow, and 1 report from the Department of Navy, the Marines, I think it was, that indicating some exchange between them. That's all we had until roughly October of 1963.
Oswald returned to Texas with his family, and in the spring of '63, he mail-ordered a revolver, then a rifle, both under an alias, A. Heidel. He asked his wife to take this picture showing off his new arsenal. Marina remembers one night the following month.
He come in the house 11:30. He was so pale, nervous, and don't want to talk. I said, what happened to him? And he told, I tried to shoot General Walker. And I asked him, who is General Walker? And he told me he was fascist. And I asked him if he had wife and children. He said, no, he's single. I said, but this does not make a difference. This is not way to show who wrong, who right. Who wrong, who right. And he told me, if Hitler was shot before war, this was better for most people.
A shot was fired at General Edwin Walker, a prominent right-wing extremist. If Oswald did it, he missed. In any case, he left town quickly. In the spring of '63, Oswald returned to the streets of New Orleans. His associations and activities were puzzling, and in the years since the assassination, suspicion and confusion have only intensified. Oswald tried to join the city's large anti-Castro movement, but a few days later, he made news by handing out pro-Castro leaflets.
You're a Marxist?
Well, I have studied Marxist philosophy, yes, sir, and also other philosophers.
But are you a Marxist? I think you did admit on an earlier radio interview that you consider yourself a Marxist.
Oh, I would very definitely say that I am a Marxist. That is correct. But that does not mean, however, that I'm a communist.
What is the difference between the two?
Well, there's a great deal of difference. Several American parties in several countries are based on Marxism, such as Ghana. Certain countries have characteristics of a socialist system, such as Great Britain with its socialized medicine. These, then, are the differences between an outright communist country and countries which adhere to leftist or Marxist principles.
In your work with the Fair Play for Cuba Committee, what are you advocating?
We advocate restoration of diplomatic, trade, and tourist relations with Cuba.
What about Oswald's other New Orleans associations? Oswald worked out of this office building. So did Guy Bannister, an ex-FBI agent, and David Ferry. Ferry and Bannister were connected to the anti-Castro movement and to organized crime. They were seen with Oswald frequently. 5 months before the assassination, Oswald applied for a new passport to travel to Cuba and Russia. Despite his previous attempt to defect, Oswald received his passport in a single day. The State Department later claimed it was a clerical error. He went to Mexico City to get visas to travel to Cuba and Russia, but both embassies said no. And so, Oswald returned to his wife Marina in Texas, who was staying with a friend, Ruth Payne.
I thought of him as a dissenter, a pamphlet passer, a person not contented with society as it was, nor with himself, nor the credit he was getting for being the sort of person he was. I think he felt he wasn't noticed or given sufficient credit. His wife complained of him as having an overblown opinion of himself, and I think he did. He was not a particularly capable person, and he certainly had very little training, so that he was not able to get jobs that interested him. Lee had spent a week unsuccessfully looking for a job in Dallas, and this was a Monday, and my neighbor and I and Marina were all talking about this difficulty, how hard it was for him, since he, for one thing, was not able to drive, couldn't get to a good many jobs that might be available. And a third neighbor who was there suggested that there might be an opening at the school book depository. I told him about this possibility, and he applied the next day and was accepted.
I interviewed him. He seemed to be well-mannered, quiet, and intelligent young fella. He stated to me, and also put on his application, that he had been serving in the Marines and had an honorable discharge. He was in good physical shape, had been in no trouble, and needed the job, needed to go to work to support his family. So I told him that after talking with him that we had some temporary work, that I would try him on it if he cared to go to work in the warehouse.
But on Thursday, November 21st, 1963, Oswald asked his co-worker, Wesley Frazier, for a ride to the Payne home where Marina was staying.
He come to me the Thursday, November the 21st, and asked me could he ride home with me that afternoon. And I said, well, yes. And I said, well, why are you going home this afternoon? And he replied that he wanted to go home and pick up some curtain rods where he could put some curtains up in his apartment. And I said, oh, very well. And then I said, well, will you be going home with me tomorrow also? And he said no. He said he wouldn't be going home with me on the 22nd.
The Warren report says Oswald picked up his rifle in Mrs. Payne's garage. And on Friday morning, November 22nd, 1963, Oswald rode with Frazier to the school book depository with the rifle in the back seat of the car. It was wrapped in a brown paper package, which he carried into the school book depository. How could a man with Oswald's past go unnoticed? Well, in fact, the FBI knew Oswald and his Russian wife were in Dallas. An agent questioned Marina just 3 weeks before the Kennedy assassination. The FBI has been criticized for not warning the Secret Service or the Dallas police about Oswald. Listen to Dallas Police Chief Jesse Curry on the night of the killing.
We in the police department here did not know he was in Dallas. I understand the FBI did know that he was in Dallas.
It was while watching television that Marina Oswald learned of the assassination. She was at home with Ruth Payne.
I lit some candles when we were still waiting to hear. And she said, "Is that a way of praying?" And I said, yes, it was. Although I even felt then that he was mortally wounded. And then we heard that he was dead. And Marina said to me, "What a terrible thing this is for Jacqueline Kennedy and for the children. Now they will have to grow up without a father."
Because I think about Jack, about her children. When this happened, and I think about her, looks like this happened with me. Maybe, my intuition told me, but I feel it looks like this happened with me. Mothers, they're just with children, no father. Do you understand me what I mean?
Yes, you're saying that when you saw this, you thought you put herself...
yes, in her position.
Yes, yourself in her place.
I don't know.
Did you ever have a thought at this time that maybe Lee had killed the president?
Ruth Payne told me somebody from Lee work in the school book depository shot president, and my heart go down because I think just one thing, maybe this was Lee. 3 o'clock, policeman come in the house and ask me if Lee had rifle. I say yes. We go in garage, and I think rifle was there. But when policeman try, to find this rifle, so rifle then was there.
The FBI never told the Warren Commission about an angry, unsigned note it received from Oswald after an agent had interviewed his wife Marina a few weeks before the assassination. He feared she would tell the FBI about his involvement in the shooting at General Walker. In the note, Oswald threatened the FBI and accused it of harassing his wife. Immediately after Oswald was killed, the FBI destroyed the note in an apparent cover-up to protect its image. There is evidence the FBI later tried to cover up some of what it knew about Oswald in Dallas rather than admit the Bureau might have made a mistake. Dan?
Phil, despite all the allegations, the House Select Committee could not prove that Oswald was an FBI informant. There is also no credible evidence to suggest that the FBI had anything to do with